Hello, Megan.
Hello.
Welcome to Tea Talks.
Thank you, Belinda.
So did you bring a tea with you today?
I have brought a tea with me today. I don't know if you can see
Ooh.
what's written on it because of my
I
awful
can't.
webcam.
They're there for their afternoon tea.
Yeah, it's part of a series of grammar grumble mugs. So I come from a literary studies background. So, and I also just love language. So this kind of stuff amuses me probably more than it should.
It's great. It's great also for English for academic purposes. What's inside the cup? That's the question.
What is inside the cup
I like
today?
the way that you had to smell it. Did you forget?
I forgot moment. I made it 5 minutes ago, so of course it's out of my brain by now because it's been that kind of year, hasn't it? But actually, what's in here is a white tea. And I actually got this from one of my students at one point as like a cultural exchange gift. So it's a loose leaf white tea.
So it's a Chinese white tea.
Yes, yeah.
Good.
But I find it's really relaxing after a long day.
Yeah, so, I find white tea really gentle. It's nice.
Yeah.
Megan, you're originally from California, is that right?
Oh, I'm from all over the place, but yeah,
okay.
I was born in San Diego. So I guess that technically means I'm from California.
Yeah, depending on how you look at things. So how did you end up teaching at Winchester School of Art in the UK?
So I did my MA degree and my bachelor's degree in the Netherlands at the University of Amsterdam. And then I worked for a few years, but I was interested in doing more research because, I have a real passion for figuring out how things work and why they work and kind of connecting to things on a pretentious and more philosophical level. So I decided to do a PhD. I applied at a few places, but the first place I applied where I got funding was Cardiff University.
Okay.
So I moved to Wales. I really enjoyed my time in Wales. It's a beautiful country.
Yes.
I hope to move back there someday.
Oh, do you? Did you learn any Welsh as you're a language lover?
A very little bit. Kind of a big regret was that I didn't learn more, but I was actually commuting back and forth between Amsterdam and Cardiff while I was studying there because my partner worked and lived in Amsterdam. So it was a long distance balancing act. So I didn't have time for a lot of extra things, but I did learn a little bit of Welsh.
Okay. I won't get you to say any of it. No. Don't worry. I won't put you on the spot like that.
It is a beautiful language, though. So yeah, and after that, I was looking for work in the UK. I started off as a teaching fellow in digital media practice at Winchester School of Art. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but I really enjoyed the work, and I enjoyed the kinds of students that we get on the program who often have a background that's really different from mine, which is really exciting when you're doing this kind of work because you can really build a diverse, more complete set of experiences than you get when, with a program that only has home students or only has, one kind of student. So that's been really exciting. And then last year I became a lecturer, which is kind of a combination of teaching and research.
Okay. And when reading about you, you have many areas of expertise. I read, that you looked into gender, post-colonial literature, film, television, fan studies. But one thing stood out to me and I wanted to know more about it. And that was monster studies.
Right, yeah, monster studies.
Could you explain?
It's a great one. Yeah, it's a great one
to those of us who aren't in the know what exactly that is.
So monster studies is this field of research that emerged mostly in the 1990s. So it's grown a lot since it was first written about, but it emerged in I guess as part of cultural studies, which is a particular academic discipline, but also in literary studies and film studies, looking at monsters and their meanings, both in popular culture and, you know, in literary texts, in high art. And I guess the initial idea behind it comes from this fact that monsters kind of represent the others in whatever culture we're a part of, right? So monsters, in addition to being kind of these scary figures that, that, you know, chase and frighten the heroes in films, they're also often queer coded in films, right? So, or you know, monsters will often be foreigners. So in the case of Dracula, you have this kind of scary person from Transylvania who's trying to immigrate to the UK and kind of take over our British way of life, right? So this is a really common trope in monsters. So monsters are often foreign, they're often disabled, they can be women, they can be people of color, you know, and 90% of the time, at least, you know, when we were looking at the 1990s, this was kind of how monsters were coded and represented. So monster studies arose to look at this phenomenon and to look whether it could potentially be used to do interesting things or talk about interesting things politically and socially.
Okay.
So I hope that's not less exciting than initially.
No,
it's a lot of interesting research and lots
very,
of
very interesting. You've published a book last year, Gothic Remixed Monster Mashups and Frankenfiction in the 21st Century Culture. There are many words there that I've never come across, and also very much into language. Monster mashup, Frankenfiction. Can you explain what these mean?
Yeah, so the reason that it probably seems like I've done research in lots of really different areas is probably because I do lots of work in remix studies, or on remix. So remix, as you probably know, is kind of the mashing up or the combination of different source material into new material. The term comes from music. So the terms mashup and remix, those both come from music.
Yeah, that's where I recognized it from. But to see it in that context, I've never, ever come across before. And I'm sure many people haven't. So it'd be really interesting to hear about that.
No, exactly. So it goes from kind of the 1960s music culture where we're combining different music tracks to make something new, to be a more general term, maybe too general sometimes, that's used to describe all different kinds of practices of appropriation and collecting and reproducing that happen in digital culture.
Okay.
So when we're talking about remix culture, we're talking about all kinds of things from fashion to kind of film that appropriates different clips, or maybe we're talking about texts like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, for example, is one book that I look at, which has been translated into Mandarin, I think, actually.
Wow.
Oh, wait, do I have a...
Is this a book
I've only
you've
got
looked
the
at?
Japanese. Yeah.
Okay.
I've only got, sadly, the Japanese edition of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies here. But
what a combination.
Yeah. But that's basically it's a
So what's
book.
that about then?
It takes Jane Austen's book, Pride and Prejudice, so the literal words, and it remixes that with a story of a zombie uprising.
Okay.
And
what's the reason behind doing it?
That's complicated, and I guess that's what the book looks at a little bit. So, you know, the book looks at remixes, at mashups, and at what I call Frankenfiction. So Frankenfiction is basically this term for stuff that falls somewhere in between remix, which is kind of this new modern thing that seems digital and trendy, and adaptation, which is an older trend that involves, you know, traditionally taking a book and turning it into a movie. So you have the movie version of Pride and Prejudice. You have the 1995, I think it is, TV series, or miniseries adaptation with Colin Firth. Of
which everyone is familiar with. Not the zombie one, but that one.
Well, and then you have the zombie.
Yeah.
Is it an adaptation? Does it count as an adaptation if it's almost literally, it's like 80% Jane Austen or something, or is it too derivative? So that was where the question kind of came. Where does this fit? Does it count as an adaptation? It's a little untraditional for an adaptation, but it's also a little too traditional to be a remix.
Okay.
And a lot of remix studies people wouldn't really consider it to be kind of part of this digital remix culture revolution. So what is it? It's a Frankenfiction is what I decided. Also because it has monsters in it. And that's what the book talks about, these texts that are a little bit too conventional for remix studies, not conventional enough for adaptation studies, and what they mean and say about popular culture today.
So this term Frankenfiction, is this something that has been around for a while, or is this something that you have invented?
It's something that I invented, and it was kind of out of necessity because the term that I had before was really long and unwieldy, and not great. So I think it was something like neo-historical monster mashups, just to kind of describe what I was working with, and that's obviously not useful at all. So.
And what is it about this particular practice that fascinates you so much and has made you write an entire book about it? What is it that's influenced you? And
so there's a lot of things about appropriative art. There's a lot of things about adaptation in general that already really interested me, because I think that this distinction in our culture between what is original and what is not original or derivative is a really important one. And it has a lot to say about a number of different things, right? So what we value as a culture, both literally in terms of like, what can we get money for? And in terms of what do we think is important or valuable? How do we define good art versus bad art? It also says a lot about, for example, about authorship. So some interesting things happen in adaptations around authorship. So for instance, again, I'm just casting about for the Pride and Prejudice and Zombies cover, but that presents itself as co-authored by Jane Austen and Seth Grahame-Smith. And a big part of the reason why these texts are often successful is because they attach themselves onto this big name author,
right?
Like Jane Austen, or
And do they have to get permission to do that, or
they don't in this case?
Right.
Because these texts are all in the public domain, which means that they're not under copyright. The characters in them are not under copyright. You can basically take these texts and do whatever you want to them.
That's really interesting.
I mean, you do have cases where people take texts that are in the public domain. So another interest of mine is histories of copyright. And we talk a lot about fair use and about transformative work. So these are two terms that come up very often. So you have fair use, which is that basically you can use any media text for teaching. Right. You can use it for, certain things are okay to use it for legally. But you also have this transformative work clause that basically says, if you transform it enough and creatively enough, then you can do whatever you want with it.
So in the case of Pride and Prejudice and
Pride
and Prejudice and the is it the Zombies? Sorry, I'm not quite sure of the title. Would they have to give any royalties at all, or is it if they've changed it enough, do they pretty much get to use what they want?
Yeah, no. So in the case of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, they can basically do whatever they want because the text is no longer under copyright. So Jane Austen has been dead for enough time that her work has passed into the public domain, and we can all use it however we want. The same thing's going to happen to Mickey Mouse, actually, very shortly. So there's a big distinction, I guess, creatively between characters that are in copyright and how you can use them, and stuff that's out of copyright and how you can use that. But of course, the fact that you can do it and whether or not it's okay to do it are also often different questions for people. A lot of people were upset about Pride and Prejudice and zombies, or thought it was, you know, silly, irreverent.
Okay. So you're now program leader for MA Global Media Management. Do your students get to learn about this side of your research? Does it influence the course in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the, I guess, pride points of the program is that the teaching that we do is always really led by our research. And we do really diverse kinds of research on the program. So we have people working on remix, like myself, and popular culture and representation. We have people working on film and film festivals, and people working on, you know, influencer culture and kind of media at the media industries level. So not looking at media productions, but how industries work. You know, we have all kinds of people doing different things. And because we're all working on things that are really practical and often really contemporary and really important to media industries today, we think it's important to also make sure that we're dealing with those subjects in classes. So not everything will be about our work, because, you know, other people's work is also really important, but we do emphasize that there's work being done on this and we are doing some of that work.
Okay, that's really interesting. So on the other end of the scale, so we've got monsters. I've also read that you have taken part in the Being Human festival, and that's kind of an interesting combination. So I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about what that's all about.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it's one that a lot of people have as well. For me, the link between those two things is precisely this monster studies discipline, right? So when we're looking at what we classify as a monster, when we're looking at who we count as, you know, an other, not part of our group, they're kind of outside our group, we're also defining who we are, we're defining what's normal. So these two concepts of kind of other, self, monster, human, normal, abnormal, they're really intimately related. And they're discussed and agreed and shaped in lots of different ways, depending on where you are and when you are, and what your beliefs are and what your politics are. And what we were interested in with this Human Worlds event was specifically how all of these distinctions, how all of these definitions relate to activism and human rights. And actually,
I read that there was also work done. I read that there was also work done in the practice of being human. Was it during these lockdown, the times that we've been in lockdown? So I thought that was quite interesting as well.
Yeah, so that was specifically looking at what it means to be human from a perspective of activism and practice and access. So digital access as well is something that we talk about a lot. So not everyone has equal access to digital content. And when that's the primary way that we express ourselves, when that's kind of the only way that we have to represent ourselves in contemporary times, you know.
It certainly was like that during lockdown. We were very much
absolutely
reliant on digital communication.
So when you have all of these issues already built into digital communication, and when you have all of these things like, for instance, algorithmic bias is something that we talk about a lot, where, you know, computer systems are coded by a certain group of people, and so they're biased towards those kinds of people.
Okay.
So all of these issues become really urgent when suddenly the only mode that we have of communication is this.
Yeah.
Right. So I have the luxury, for example, of having a separate room, even if it's like a closet where I can come to do my work. I have a stable internet connection. I have, you know, all of this technology, most of which is not provided by my work, but which I kind of have because of all of these other factors that make up who I am in society, and, you know, my disadvantages and my privilege and all of these things. So we talked a bit about that and what it
as
means
opposed
to be human
so
together.
So as opposed to, for example, if we would compare what you have, and then would you be comparing it then to?
Well, so for instance, there have been lots of interesting conversations about in disability communities, amongst people who, for example, have always required home working in order to be able to do their jobs, or from people who are unable to work on screens for a long period of time, or people who have, you know, chronic health issues. And we're suddenly becoming aware of all of these issues with working online, but these are issues that have been really obvious to a lot of people for a long time. And this is what we're talking about with kind of thinking about being human and rediscovering being human. Because often we think this is a narrow set of experiences, but it's so much bigger.
Yeah. And the kind of issues that we've now face working online, for example, were not the same issues we faced when we were teaching in a classroom environment. And that's opened up some positives, but also some challenges. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like any situation.
Yeah, exactly. So going then from the practice of being human, I read that you are editor of the genealogy of the posthuman. So again, so we're going from monster to human to posthuman. Can you explain what this means?
Yeah, so the posthuman is this concept that comes from a lot of different places, but I guess when a lot of people, if they're familiar with the term posthuman, they're probably thinking about aliens, monsters, robots, cyborgs, you know, all of these figures that emerge from technological advancement or human modification. So the popular discussions around it are kind of about, oh, you know, what happens if the singularity comes and we reach this point where we're suddenly no longer human? What comes after the human? And this genealogy that I look at, and the questions that I'm specifically interested in from a humanities and a digital media perspective, is fine. Let's, you know, what if that? But also, is there some way that we can also continue to think, as we think about the possibilities for the future, can we also apply those to the present?
Right.
So does it make sense to think about the future of humanity when we still don't really have a definition of what it means to be human, when not all humans have the same human rights? So it's kind of the process of saying, whoa, let's not get too excited here about the technological possibilities without also thinking about the human consequences for all humans, right? So if you Google posthuman, you'll get a lot of technological images. You'll also get a lot of images of white people. You'll get a lot of images of very specific white able-bodied people. So it's often a very specific subset of humanity that we're talking about when we talk about the posthuman and the human.
Or those who are fortunate enough, if they did have, for example, a disability, that they would be able to get the technology for them to, as you know, things like prosthetics, and things like that. That they, you know, those people that would have that advantage to be able to have that and to work as a kind of
it becomes a discussion immediately of normal abnormal, able, disabled, enhanced. You know, what does it mean to be enhanced?
Yeah.
Is a disabled person, for instance, in the Special Olympics, you have people who are technically enhanced humans, right? So they have metal legs, they can run faster than a normal human could run. So they're disabled, but they're also superhuman.
Yeah, and that actually during the Olympics in 2012, I remember that they had the slogan, they were superhuman. They were almost marketing the
I like
Olympics
to use that
as
video for
superhuman.
teaching. Yeah, maybe we'll share that after this talk.
Yeah, really interesting. So, and they did that for different reasons, because I believe that not a lot of people were viewing the Olympics. Well, they were viewing the non-disabled Olympics, but they didn't get much attention. And then after that campaign, they got more and more attention because they were no longer being labeled as disabled, but actually superheroes.
Yeah, which on the one hand is a great move, but on the other hand is based on some really troubling assumptions about, you know, what needs to be done in order to make something attractive or marketable.
Yes.
Or normal.
So is that something then that you talk about with the students, these sorts of campaigns, and when you're discussing things like PostHuman?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about representation and media, because it's kind of one of the most important things to be aware of, I guess, if you're going to be a media manager, is understanding how these things are produced, how they work, how they can be changed or not. We do actually talk a lot about posthumanism in semester 2. So there's an option module that we run that's called Digital Cultures. So it's not required, but in that module, we have all these different ways of looking at digital cultures, because of course there's more than one. Digital culture is not the same for everyone. There's little micro cultures, there's a global culture. And posthumanism is one of the things that we talk about when we talk about that.
I've never thought of it like that. I mean, obviously we you know, when you think about different cultures, it's not something that necessarily comes to everybody's mind, the fact that in the digital world, there are different cultures. And that's, yeah, that not everyone works the same way online, and there might be a certain etiquette that different cultures follow.
Also from platform to platform, right? Each platform has its own culture. Zoom has a different culture to, you know, Twitter. I guess one of the things that's important when we're talking about what it means to be human is to make sure that you have lots of different stories. So when we're talking about genealogy, so genealogy is a word that kind of means the history or origin or roots of something, but we don't mean that to suggest that there's only one history of the human or the post-human. There are lots of different competing ones. So we have some really different kinds of entries as well. Some of those are on popular culture. So we have an entry that just went up on Lady Gaga and how Lady Gaga kind of represents the non-human, the queer, the post-human. We also got some more theoretical stuff, you know, so on, like if you look at the history of the human-animal divide, for example, this is often actually based on some really weird science. So it's based on kind of Darwinism, obviously, but there's a whole history of eugenics, which is, you know, kind of this idea that some kinds of humans or species are better than other kinds of humans or species, and we should be trying to, you know, to encourage human progress by ensuring the survival of the best race or the best kind of species, which is a huge problem. I hope, obviously, this is a, you know, a really problematic science that unfortunately some people are still advocating today. But, you know, we have some articles as well looking at this history of kind of this point when human and animal became two different things. And we were always worried about, you know, going back to being animals or going back to a primitive state before we had technology, or this fear of being an animal, basically.
Right.
and how that causes problems for us still today. So lots of different kinds of things.
Yeah.
Depending
And
on
then you've got on the
interest.
other end of the spectrum, people want to get back to nature and get away from the technology and to relax.
Yeah.
And because it is very also quite stressful when you have so many things going on at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely a movement in people writing about posthumanism to, you know, to encourage people to think about the ways in which we're not actually separate from our environment. You know, we're so affected by every little part of our ecosystem. You know, our bodies are also built up of lots of different microbes and living organisms, and we're not as simple as we like to think that we are, or as separate from other living things as we like, or non-living things even, you know.
Thank you so much, Megan, for coming to Tea Talks, and we could talk for hours about this.